Welcome to the Album Anniversary Podcast. Today's show is about The Bends by Radiohead. It was released March 13th, 1995, so it is celebrating a 30-year anniversary. I am your host, Caleb, or Caleb the Spy on Twitter and Instagram. Every day on social media, I post about what I call album anniversaries. So on the Album Anniversary Podcast, we take a look at a classic album, an album we love, or an album that is important to us on the anniversary of its release date. Albums on the show often focus on alternative rock, punk, and my strange obsession with ska. In the 90s, I was super into the Christian music scene, so that does come up often on the show. Today, I'm joined again by Mike to talk about The Bends by Radiohead. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back. And it's always great to talk about my favorite band, Radiohead.
Yeah, I'm glad you could join me. Last time, if you listened last time, you were on the episode about Monster by REM. And at the time we worked together. So I haven't actually seen you in a bit because I switched jobs. And so it's really good to see you. I'm glad to hear things are going well. We caught up a little before, behind the curtains. We were talking about where we were both at. So I'm glad you're doing well, and I'm glad to have you back on the show. I'm glad we could stay in contact. And I know when we talked last time, you had mentioned, Radiohead being a big band. So I'm really excited to have you back on the show to get to talk about this. I'm excited about this album. So yeah, thanks for taking time out of your Sunday night to chat.
My pleasure.
And, last time you were on the show, we kind of sometimes do like a musical history, but you had actually mentioned you were like working on some music with some local guys where you're at. Are you still doing that? I mean, you still like having a chance to make some music with people?
We've actually, schedules have made that difficult. So we haven't rehearsed in a long time, but, still have aspirations, play an open mic every once in a while.
Okay. Just around the area, just you and a guitar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or piano.
Do you do mostly covers then when you do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't write songs.
Okay.
Or I've tried, but I don't like them.
That's also probably a tough gig. You walk into a bar and you're playing originals, like that can be a bit of a tough sell for some people.
Yeah.
So what are 3 songs from your standard set list?
Ooh.
This is not on the script. I'm just going totally off script.
There's a Simon and Garfunkel song, Only Living Boy in New York.
Good one.
What are my other go-tos? There's a Tom Waits song. I Hope That I Don't Fall in Love with You.
Okay.
It's from his early album, but it's fairly. I think the Eagles even did a version of it.
Okay.
It's Tom Waits stuff goes. It's not out there. It's just kind of a ballad. And what is another song that I would go to? This is the problem. When you play guitar, people always say, "Oh, play something," and then your mind just goes blank.
Right, and all you can think of is Wonderwall, and that becomes the go-to.
Yeah, Karma Police is another one that
nice.
I know my wife is tired of hearing because I've played it a bunch, both on guitar and keyboard.
I like that idea. She's there at the open mic, just shaking her head in the back. That's enough. I don't want to hear this again.
Yep.
That's funny. That's probably a more unique one, especially you're up in the upper Midwest. I would guess the other 2 are a little more like straightforward for an upper Midwest bar. So the Karma Police probably throws a couple people off, but I had a guy on the show a while back who does this, and he's like almost always does at least one Hootie and the Blowfish song, and that's the album we were covering, is that Cracked Review, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I always do because everybody knows this. Though I Want to Hold Your Hand one." I think he's like it gets the whole room singing along every time, and I'm like, I bet it does. So
yeah, I've been meaning to learn some more like crowd pleasers.
Right.
Don't Stop Believin' is one that I was working on piano. And yeah, not because I'm a huge fan of it, but just because I want to have something to play that other people could get into.
I mean, that's part of this is like even doing this show, yes, I occasionally cover albums that I really, really love. Both of the albums that we've talked about, Monster, and then this one that we'll talk about here in a minute, are on like my all-time favorite albums list. But I'm doing I'm doing a show coming up that like I don't even like the album all that much. But I know a lot of people do. It's a really important album to some people. So it's like, all right, get a couple people on. I'm going to let them do a lot of the talking. Occasionally something like that does surprise you. There was one recently that the first listen, I was like, ooh, this is going to be rough. But by the end of it, I was like, okay, I found my groove with this. Like, yes, it's not going to be an all-time favorite for me, but I can at least find something where there's one coming up that I'm like, oh man, this is going to be rough. But that's what you got to do sometimes. You got to do a little marketing. You got to sing a Hootie and the Blowfish song or a Journey song just to overwhelm the crowd. So,
yep.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear you're still getting to do some of the music stuff. That's exciting to hear. So I say with that out of the way, let's jump in and tackle this album.
All right.
Again, we're talking about The Bends by Radiohead, released March 13th, 1995, and I will say that is the UK release date because it was actually not released in the US until April 4th, again, the same year, 1995. So this episode will come out on March 13th. We'll celebrate that one because that's the one I had it in the calendar, and I didn't have time to rearrange my podcast schedule. So we're going to do the March 13th date because I realized, but actually April 4th in the US. And it was the group's second album, and it was produced by John Leachy. I'm really good with last names. And then there's a number of other people who also contribute, like Nigel Godrich and Jim Warren also worked on this album. So a couple of different producers.
Yeah, Nigel Godrich is like, I think, a big component of the Radiohead sound and becomes more integral in the recording of OK Computer. I think he only had one track and a couple B-sides on this album.
Agreed. Yep.
But yeah, you see his style and his influence over their recorded work all over the place.
Yes, I would almost argue he's the sixth member. I mean, that's kind of how it feels like to me when you start to look at every album after this. He's so integral to their evolution and their story.
Kind of how George Martin is referred to as the fifth Beatle.
Yeah, or there's that guy who's the fifth member of Weezer, even though they've had like 10 members now because people keep on leaving the band. But there's a guy who runs their website. Carl. Carl is his name. I once got an email from him because I asked him a question. I sent their like contact information, and he actually responded back to me. I was like, "Oh, thanks, Carl."
Nice.
So, yeah. Just some other notes about people who worked on this. John, who I'm not going to even attempt his last name again because I'm sure I butchered it the first time. He has a crazy long list of albums that he's worked on, and one of my favorite things about him is that the first album he ever worked on was All Things Must Pass by George Harrison. He was just the tape operator on it, but it's a fun little credit to have that he's worked on. Again, All Things Must Pass by George Harrison. Again, he was the tape operator. That's where he got to start. And that was what he did for a lot. He'd done a lot of mixing and engineering. He moved eventually into production as well, do producing, but crazy long list of albums and, well into the hundreds of albums. So that was the only other note I had on the producers of this album. The recording, and we might get into this later, we'll see, but the recording section on Wikipedia just has an endless amount of information. So I'm not going to go through all of it. I think what is important to note is that this feels like the place where they started to experiment and really play with the craft. They had met in college or maybe even younger, but like this really starts to feel like the place where they start to evolve. And there's some starting and stopping. There's, they started and they were frustrated and then they went on tour and then they came back. So again, if you want to know more about the recording process, I could just read it, but that would make for a fairly boring podcast, except for me messing up all the reading of it and being bumbling over it. But So again, we might get into it more if there's anything you have to add about that recording, but it's a huge section of the Wikipedia page. Totally worth checking out and reading, but I'm not going to read it on the podcast.
Yeah, it does feel like the from what I've read, the band really solidified playing as a group on
Yeah,
the tour of Pablo Honey and felt a little bit more gelled after all that time on the road.
yeah,
And on the bends, it feels like especially the guitars kind of start to find the place that will be their characteristic of the Radiohead sound
yeah.
with Tom York playing main rhythm, Johnny Greenwood doing the leads, and Ed with a sort of more spacey, ethereal, sound effecty kind of
Right.
ambiance.
Yeah. It is amazing. This is whatever you think about where Radiohead has gone. This is a guitar record, and so that touring and that connectiveness. I mean, to have three guitars and to have them all feel like a unit yet unique is pretty cool, and I think that's something that they really achieve on this album.
In addition, the thing to remember about the time this came out is the massive popularity of Creep off Pablo Honey.
Mm-hmm.
There's huge pressure on them from the record label to deliver another mega hit like this song, but I think they wanted to avoid being known as a grunge or a Britpop band
Yeah,
being boxed into those categories. So, like you said, yeah, they really started pushing their songwriting and being more experimental in the studio.
yeah. It's a great transition because it was a commercial success, but it really took a while to gain that traction. Like it didn't, I think it kind of came out and people were excited about it, but then like in the US, it reached, it was like number 88 on the US charts. And it was actually considered a pretty big letdown at the time because again, Creep had been such a huge hit. So, eventually it's gone on to be platinum 4 times in the UK and platinum in the US, but it did take a while for it to happen. Like it hits number 4 on the UK charts, but it's not right away. It's later, kind of as the I think the end of the year came and it started making a lot of lists for that. So it did eventually end up being a big hit, but it kind of took some time. So it ended up producing 6 singles. The first of which was in '94, and the last of which was in 1996. So again, over half the album, because I think it's only. Let me check the track listing now. Scrolling while on. Oh, I got it over here. Yeah, it's 12 songs, and 6 of them would end up being singles. So it's half the album ends up being a single at one point.
A couple good music videos to come out of this creative effort too. The
Yeah.
one for Just, I think, broke my brain as a teenager. I thought it was the coolest thing ever, where they have the guy laying on the street. Everyone asks him, "What's wrong? What's okay? What are you doing?" And he's just saying, "No, leave me alone. You don't want to know." And the final scene is he says something not audible, and there's huge fan speculation and uh, tons of lengthy forum threads designed to or dedicated to understanding what he said and trying to figure out the words. But the final shot of the video is just everyone on the ground laying down on the sidewalk. Just they've all been incapacitated by the magnitude of the words he uttered.
Oh, I don't know if I've seen that. I
You should give it
probably
a
have at some
watch.
point, but yeah, I'll have to go back and watch it. That's interesting because it sounds familiar now that you say it, but I, I can't think of the last time I saw a Radiohead video. Not necessarily something they're known for. I feel like partially maybe it's that difference of like not having the huge, they're still their biggest radio single is still probably Creep, uh, all these years later, and so I think I've seen the video for that too. But yeah, I'll have to go back and check out some of the music videos off this one.
Yeah.
Initially, when it was released, it's interesting. It was kind of released to mixed reviews. So, like, The Chicago Tribune gave it 1 star. Spin gave it a 5 star, but then the Village Voice gave it a C. But NME, I always struggle over that, gave it a 9 out of 10. The Guardian gave it 4 out of 4. And then there's a bunch of other positive reviews, but it was released to kind of mixed reviews. In retrospect, it's gone on to, I think everybody who gave it a bad review at the beginning has realized, oh, I've made a mistake. And I think it also is part of that, like it doesn't have that overwhelming hit single the way Pablo Honey did. And so there's a lot of, like, if you look up the Ben's retrospective review, all of them are 10 stars. Like all of them are 10 out of 10. Nobody is going back on this thing and going, well, now in hindsight, I don't think it's aged well. The retrospective reviews are overwhelmingly positive. In fact, they're all glowing, to be totally honest.
Yeah, and its position in Radiohead's catalog, it's not my favorite album, but of theirs. But that that said, still love it. I
Yeah.
still go back and listen to it regularly.
And it's gone on now. I mean, if you look at like kind of the all-time great albums list, it's included in tons of them. Like Colin Larkin's all-time top 1,000 albums, it's in that. It's been included on all 3 of the Rolling Stone top 500 albums, and then in the 2005 version of 1001 albums you must hear before you die, it's in that. So it's gone on to be. I think most people look at this as kind of one of the last. It's one of the great records of the last 30 years, and continues to be, receive that high praise.
And it is fairly approachable.
Yes.
It follows more traditional song forms than their later work with verse chorus structure.
Yep.
It is a guitar rock album at
Yep.
heart versus some of their later more experimental works can
Yep.
be take a couple listens before you really things click for you.
Yep. And they approachable is a great word. This is if you like rock music, this is of the big 3. I know that I actually don't. What we can talk Radiohead ranking after we're all done. Otherwise, the show will go on forever. But like, the big 3, I think by them are often considered the Bends, OK Computer, and Kid A. That seems to be the height of their popularity. I don't think it's the height of their creative output. That's my opinion. But I kind of often refer to that as kind of the big 3. Like, this is, I think it is the most approachable of those from a mainstream audience approach. I think that's a great word for it because, yeah, OK Computer it gets a little experimental, and then I've heard Kid A described as like the greatest left turn in rock history because it is. Even I listened to it recently and I was like, wow, can you imagine? I can try and put my head into where people, if you were a big coming out OK Computer, like it probably was like what am I listening to? Because it's such a left turn. So last thing I want to touch on is the album artwork. It's by Stanley Donwood, and he has gone on to do I believe he's done every Radiohead album cover since then. It's great artwork. I have this on vinyl, and so I've been listening to it a lot recently to get ready for the show. And so it's been up on our banister where I have our record player that's upstairs. And all of my kids have made, at least I think 3 of my kids have made a comment about it. So we were actually looking it up. We were having dinner before we started, and I was re-looking it up real quick. And because they were like, is it just a mannequin? And I was like, well, it's not just a mannequin. It's a CPR mannequin. And the reason they did it is because what's his name? I just read it. Don?
Stanley
Stanley.
Donwood.
Yeah, so Stanley literally said, he's like, yeah, I love the expression on his face. It looked like an android who had just discovered ecstasy and dread in the same moment. And I'm like, well, that's a great description of what it looks like. And they didn't actually so they filmed it, like they took a bunch of video of it, and then they were playing it on a TV, and they paused it and then took a picture of it. So the album cover is quite striking. It stands out. And again, 3 of my 4 children all made comments about the artwork at some point this week. So that's how striking it is.
Yeah, it's fairly iconic and in the Radiohead fandom is almost become a meme trying to catch like your significant other fell asleep in the Benz pose.
Oh, I've got a lot of them. My wife. So it's funny. We're just getting a real personal life here. Yeah, everybody can sit in for this. I can't sleep. I've got sleeping problems where I just don't sleep for days. My wife is the opposite. She like can't stay awake. So like if we're in the car for more than 20 minutes, she is asleep. It's a guarantee. And so whenever it happens, me and the kids have a fun time with dad taking a quick picture of her with her head straight back. And then when we get home, we always show her the picture. It's kind of become a family joke of mom sleeping in the car. And she's totally in the Ben's position. That is hilarious. I've never heard that before.
But I think you're kind enough to not put that online
No, no, I'm not
for the
jumping onto
memes.
Radiohead forums to.
A wise move.
Yeah, the kids get a kick out of it. That's what matters.
Yep.
So our first question, how did you first discover this album?
I came to the Bends by way of OK Computer.
Oh, okay.
So the when I was first getting interested in music and pop culture in general, MTV was the video for Paranoid Android was
Okay.
playing all the time on MTV. And if you've ever seen it, it's kind of this iconic, surreal, weird, animated adventure. Anyway, OK Computer was my introduction to Radiohead,
Sure.
and then a friend shared this album with me as a follow-up, and really enjoyed it, but have come to appreciate it more and more over the years, especially as I've begun playing music. I've got
Hmm.
a greater appreciation for the musicianship, the songwriting, and this also started to get me into music theory.
Hmm.
The song Just, Tom says that Johnny was just trying to cram as many chords as possible into the song. And it's interesting because it's a very guitar focused song
Yeah.
where it's to play it on guitar, the main chords is just moving the exact same shape up and down the fretboard.
Hmm.
But to do that, it's totally natural on guitar, but on piano it would be challenging because you're changing keys, you have different sharps and flats and accidentals as you're moving that chord shape around.
Hmm.
So, and the other theory note, not to go too deep on that song, is the ascending riff that
Okay.
Johnny Greenwood does in the solo is an unusual scale. It's called the octatonic scale,
Okay.
in that most scales have a root note,
Hmm.
or a key center, like this is A major or G minor, but that scale, there are only two or three versions of the scale. It's kind of symmetrical in a way that it has the same notes depending no matter where you start.
Hmm.
And it does a really wonderful job of building that tension as he just keeps ascending up the notes in the scale.
Hmm. So this really was like you discover OK Computer, but then like as you've come back, this is kind of like enhanced that experience just because like again you play guitar and like it was I mean it was almost like an introduction to I mean is this an introduction of sorts to like experimental more I want to say art rock, which I know is a probably a loaded term, but like is this kind of end up being that introduction for you in some ways?
Absolutely. Yeah, this album, and I mean OK Computer
OK
as
Computer for
well,
sure, yeah.
and also a gear obsession. So understanding all the different pedals that they use to create those sounds has also become kind of a minor obsession.
Sure. So if you were on Instagram, your whole Instagram would just be gear. What are they called? Gear boards I'm not a gearhead, so it's not my thing. Is that just all you'd be looking at? Is like, oh, what do they got set up?
Yeah, whenever I go to a show, I'm trying to I'll be up there near the stage if I can get there after trying to scope out what's on the guitarist pedal boards.
That's nice. Pedal boards. There it is. I'm so out of it. That's fun. My introduction to this album is a little. It's funny because like I remember listening to, I remember Creep being on the alternative rock station when I was a kid, or, in the 90s, and I was a high schooler. And then I remember this coming out, but I think it didn't land with me. So like I didn't own it by any means. And so I was mostly listening to, a lot of Christian music, but then I was just kind of dubbing stuff off the radio. I remember I had dubbed a lot of, so I had Creep, I had dubbed that off the radio. So I had a tape, I had a bunch of tapes of just songs I liked off the radio that I would listen through. But I don't know if I had any from this album. And then it wasn't till, and this is, I know the joke has become how late I am on everything. It wasn't until the 2010s that I really took a deep dive. And it was actually a conversation on Twitter. It was a guy named Clint Wells. He's a guy that I got to know on Twitter, and I would go back and forth with him a little about music stuff. And I think he was trying to, he wanted somebody to try and convince him of why Arcade Fire was worth listening to. And then like we were bantering back because this is his favorite album by Radiohead. And he was like, oh, this one's so much better than these. And so, cause he's a guitar player by trade, he is a traveling musician. He's not in a band. He travels with a whole bunch of different people. And so me and him were going back and forth, and it was then that I was like, all right, it's like, I don't think I have a copy of this. I think I ordered a used copy off Amazon. And it was like, all right, I'm going to dig into this. And it was kind of for me like rediscovering them. And it did start here. It started here because that was the challenge, was to listen to the Bends. And so then it was like, oh, I really do like this. All right, and so then I now have all their stuff, and I have a couple of their albums on vinyl as well. And but that's really when it was. It was Clint Wells challenging me to like about why this album was so great, and I was like, all right, I'll listen. I'll take a deeper dive, and I got it and took that deeper dive. So yeah, it was sometime in the 2010s that I know I had heard a lot of these songs on the radio, but I think none of them had really landed with me until that moment in 2010.
It's always great to have those friends that can push you to explore new things and step outside your boundaries a little bit. I know as I age, I get more and more set in my ways and
Yes.
less open to discovering new stuff. So it's helpful to have those people in your life.
Yeah, it's been fun. I've definitely discovered a online community of music people, and like two of the shows I've done recently actually were I had never even heard of. I mean, I'd heard of one, but I had never taken a deep dive listen on the albums before like 2023. I was like, oh, I really like this. This is great. So it is fun to have those people who can kind of stretch your wings. But yeah, Clint Wells, shout out Clint Wells. I'm sure he'll never listen to this, but there you go, Clint. Thanks for making me listen to the Bends while I made him listen to. I think it was the Suburbs by Arcade Fire was what I was
Oh,
trying to get him to listen to.
I think that's a fair trade. I think you
Yeah,
both came out ahead.
yeah. I mean that is my favorite Arcade Fire album, and I don't think he ever fell in love with it, but I don't care. You broke another mirror, you're turning into something new enough. Don't leave me high, don't leave me dry, don't leave me high, don't leave me dry. Let's go on to our next question then. So, what is it that you love about this album?
I love the songwriting. I love the production. I love the variety. There are really, really ripping solos and rock songs, but there are also softer, more ballady type
Yes.
songs as well. So it's got a good pacing, good variety of songs, and yeah, just great songwriting, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Yeah, this album walks a lot of lines, or it kind of it balances a lot of things. So you mentioned like the variety, like some of it feels huge and anthemic, but then like other spots feel kind of intimate and intricate, I want to say, even though I don't know if that's the right word, but like it feels grand at times and then small at times, but yet they both feel like they're in the right place. So yes, it's absolutely balanced great. And you're right. This is I think where they really embrace the idea of songcraft. I think that is they really go hard into it. So I think those are definitely qualities that shine through on this album. And it's a masterpiece. I mean,
Absolutely. And with the anthemic nature, it does feel like Tom York really comes into his own developing his vocal style. He
yes.
does have those big soaring anthemic tunes, but also they expressed the influence of going to see a the group had seen Jeff Buckley perform, and Tom York was inspired to explore his falsetto range based
Mm.
on that performance.
Which I think does come through. I think again, you mentioned the production, and I think it does a good job capturing the kind of their energy and dynamic sound. And I think his vocals really are like I know everybody's gonna. I think this is a huge step forward from Pablo Honey, and it's not just the sound, but it also is his performance. I think he matures as a again that idea of songcraft. Like he's it's not that he's taking it more seriously because I don't think he's ever taken anything not seriously in his entire life, but like it just feels like this huge step forward. And I think that production helps musically, and that's what a lot of people focus on. But I also think his vocals are really well produced on this.
Absolutely.
One last thing that I will note is that I will say I don't catch all the lyrics all the time, and that's kind of a Radiohead thing, I think. But they feel personal, and I'm just going on purely vibe. And I'm sure there are times where they're not, but I was looking through some of the lyrics, and they at least have enough out there that they have those moments where they can feel very personal, even though I don't know if it's not like he's out there like bearing his soul to people, but it has that element, and it's what seems to be communicated on this album. It has those moments that make it feel personal.
Yeah, the idea of health and fragility of well-being crops seems to crop up in a number
Yeah,
of different places. My iron lung, obviously,
yeah,
there's the symbolism of iron lungs, but um, just as well
mm,
and bones both touch on themes of the fragility of well-being and
mm,
health. And yeah, those that is kind of a vulnerable topic to explore in a recorded work that's going to be published to the world.
yeah. And I feel like that's. Do you feel like he comes back to that often? Like that idea of like I feel like Radiohead at times it has a lot of dystopian lyrics. Like I think there is a again, I made the joke about he's a fairly serious songwriter, but he's a fairly serious. He seems like a very serious dude.
And again, you mentioned dystopian themes and the idea of kind of disconnectedness, isolation, which of course
Mm,
will be all over OK Computer, but songs like um, Black Star and Fake Plastic Trees,
yeah,
I think hit that note well.
yeah, for sure. All right, so our next question then is why is this album something that's important to you? And you've already touched on a little bit. And if it's not important, which but I think it is, why is it something that holds up for you?
Yeah, I think the personal relationship I've had with it through learning the music and
Hmm.
the the techniques and songwriting employed benefiting my own understanding and musicality.
Yeah. I think especially you talk about that it's something that's helped you learn more music or kind of dive deeper into that theory. Like this is a great guitar record. And some of their later stuff is less guitar driven. It's still there. I mean, they still have 3 guitarists in the band, but it's less of that where like this is a great guitar record. And you could argue, and we're celebrating its 30-year anniversary, you could argue this is the best guitar record of the last 30 years. And I think you can make a real argument for that. So I think that is something about it that holds up. And so like I think how many people who have really dove deep, I want to say dived deep, that would be good English. How many people have dove deep into music has this record been that inspiration for like, what else can I do with this guitar? How else can I play with this? How else can I change it? Because this feels really unique to 1995. I mean, this is not grunge, it's not Britpop. It is something unique, and that really shines through on this record.
And of their catalog, this is the record that I think I would put on in a car just driving around. I have memories of that in high school.
Yeah.
Whereas, okay, Computer or like Amnesiac, that might be a bit of a vibe kill.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you mentioned that idea of approachable. Like, if you were going to start somebody who's never heard Radiohead, this is a good spot. Like, if they're into rock and roll, this might be a better spot to start them than Kid A. And I love Kid A, but starting somebody on Kid A is a you gotta trust the listener a little on that. Where like this one, like yeah, you can just go and vibe with it. Is that what I want to say?
For sure.
The other thing I think makes this stand up is that listening to this makes you feel something, and it is sometimes happy and joyful. There's moments that feel, even if the lyrics may not be, but they feel at least semi happy. I know OK Computer, there's almost none of that. But and then they also do make you feel a little, there's a little despair in there, and there's a little bit of hopelessness, and it's back and forth. So I feel like it's a piece of art that can make you feel something, which I think is something that helps it stand up and hold up.
Another place this album crops up in the popular culture is in the movie Clueless. The main character, who's kind of a valley girl, comes on in the background, and she complains about the maudlin rock of the college radio station. Which I think that movie is also a highly underrated piece of pop culture from the time.
Yeah, I think actually a lot of people have gone on to see it as like, because I think we didn't have memes back in the mid 90s. Those didn't exist yet. We just had jokes that went around, and I think it was kind of a joke, but I think a lot of people have started to look at that movie as saying more than we thought it was saying back then. Like everybody just kind of thought it was funny, where it's actually maybe saying something deeper, although still has some borderline inappropriate relationships.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think it is based on a Jane Austen work, so
I think so.
it
Yeah.
has some literary bona fides underlying its pop culture sense. But I've gotten us off on a
No, it's fine.
total tangent here.
I was thinking about like the musical references in that movie because the Mighty Mighty Bosstones are in that movie, and then they also are making a Radiohead reference. So they're all over the place on their musical references in that movie.
It's a great soundtrack. I had that. That was a car album for me too. Fake Plastic Trees is the song that is on that she's complaining about. For all the talk of depression and negative emotions, there is some wry wit as well.
Hmm.
In the song Fake Plastic Trees, there's the lyric where it talks about a guy, she's married to a guy who used to do surgery for girls in the 80s, but gravity always wins.
Oh, funny.
So even though the music and the feeling is kind of
Dystopian and depressive or depressing.
yeah, they sneak in bits of humor.
Yeah.
where you don't necessarily expect them.
Yeah, that's funny. I don't know if I ever caught that. I mentioned earlier I don't catch all the lyrics on this, and I don't know if I've ever caught that one. That's a good one. I think another thing that helps this hold up is that it is a nice collective work. Like again, like Creep is their biggest, I think it still is their biggest radio hit. And if I'm wrong on that, sorry everyone. But I think it is their biggest radio hit, but like this album is a better album than Pablo Honey, and it is just a better collective work. And yes, none of these singles may pop as much as Creep did and connect with a mainstream audience as much, but as a collective work, this album is just so well put together. I think you can put it on. I don't love long albums. I've said that over and over again, and it's 48 minutes and it doesn't feel it. Like it doesn't feel like it gets old. And like you've mentioned the song Just a couple times. That is the start of side B when you have it on vinyl, and it's like there's no lacking in the second half of this album because it starts, that second half starts great. And so like there is just a lot of energy through this whole thing, and it's a great collective work.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no standout songs, but I think that might have been kind of intentional too. They were
Hmm.
trying to move away from Creep and distance themselves from that
Yeah.
one-hit wonder status, and so it's a much more balanced record that
Yeah.
has a lot of solid songs. I don't There's nothing that I skip or I feel like drags down
Yeah.
the flow of the record.
Yeah, and it comes in for me number 87 on my 2023 list of all-time favorite albums list. I'm working on a new one, or I'm working at refining it. So I don't know where it'll come in on my 2025 if I get it done this year. I have hit I think I'm almost up to 300 albums now, so it's gotten a little out of control. But we'll see. So last time I did that list, it was number 87. So I have a lot of affection for this album at this point in my life. All right, we've mentioned a number of tracks, but what are some of your favorites from this album? What are tracks that really stand out? And I know we just mentioned it's kind of a collective work, and but there are standout tracks in my opinion. Stuff that really does, is pretty amazing and kind of all time great songs. So, what are some of your favorites from this album?
Absolutely. Just aside from having a great music video, is phenomenal musically, has a great guitar solo.
Yep.
The intro, Johnny Greenwood is using he uses the Digitech whammy pedal, which is a pitch shifting effect. So
Hmm.
in the intro, he's playing it up low on the guitar neck, but the it's shifted up an octave
Hmm.
to get to where the riff actually is heard.
Huh.
And it also has kind of a characteristic. It was advanced technology for
Hmm.
the time, and the ability to track notes, especially multiple notes being played simultaneously and shift the pitch. It has a bit of glitchiness, which gives it a
Hmm.
cool lo-fi vibe,
Yeah.
and it's now a highly sought after piece of guitar gear.
Nice. Do you have one?
No, I do not.
Are they
Uh,
expensive?
yeah, if you want the version that was used on this record, those are very expensive on Reverb. But fortunately, I just got into a nice modeling unit, and pretty much everything for the quality of playing and recording that I do, pretty much everything can be emulated digitally now.
Hmm.
So that has given me a chance to play around with some effects like this, even
Okay.
if it's not the real deal.
The real deal. I got it. I do love when he yells, "Can you do it to yourself?" It's like one of their more like, I think that's what he says. Can you do it to yourself? It feels very rock and roll. Like it's because again, where they've gone is not rock and roll. Like they're not. You don't look at these guys and you're like, well, these guys are rock stars in the like way that most people traditionally do. But that line when he sings it, I always think, oh, this is his attempt at being a rock star. Even though I don't think that's at all what he's doing. I think he's just singing it. But it's the line that stands out the most on that album. It's or on that song.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It might be "And You Do It to
Oh,
Yourself."
that could be it. Yep.
And I don't know. I always heard it as more of the self-destructive things that we or patterns that we get into
Hmm.
and the suffering that comes with self-destructive tendencies.
Yeah, I'd try and look up the lyrics, but it'll. I'll see if I can do it here. I'm gonna try not to crash my my computer, my weak computer. You do it to yourself. You do, and that's what really hurts. You do it to yourself. Just you. You can do it to yourself. So that's what it is. Nice. What are other songs that stand out?
The title track, obviously,
Yep.
great anthemic rock
Yep.
song. Um, Fake Plastic Trees, um, great songwriting in that one.
Yep.
Themes of isolation in a relationship or relationship that's not working out, and the
Hmm.
superficiality and artificiality of interacting with other people in modern times.
Yeah. That song's so interesting to me, the fake plastic trees, because it's so pretty, but yet it feels like lyrically depressing. Like it's this again, it's this amazing artistry that like it's a pretty song in my opinion, but yes, it feels a little dark. So it's amazing how they pull that off.
Yeah, if you don't listen to the words, it
Yeah.
it can seem like an acoustic song that builds really well into a nice crescendo.
Yeah. You mentioned the bends, and I do think that is one of those just great guitar driven rock songs. Like you mentioned it's just a great rock song, but it is. It's like the guitar tones on that are just so strong. Like they come through really really well on that song, and in some ways it's a song that even though it's the title track, it kind of gets left. Like I think Planet, Telex, High and Dry, Fake Plastic Trees, those are I think some of the ones that people really really remember, but the title track almost gets forgotten, especially on side A, because I think side A is really strong. But it's funny because I think it's one of my favorite songs on the album is the title track, which maybe is a little basic, but it's just something about the guitar tones and the way the guitars drive that song forward. I think it's really great.
Yep, Telex is another one that stands out to me.
Yeah.
Great tones, just the atmospheric kind of
Yes.
whoosh before it kicks in.
Yep.
I've got a memory of like going on a family ski trip and being at the top of a run, and I've got my Discman in my jacket pocket,
Mm.
and probably skipping all over the place because the technology at the time. And putting that on and just the combination of being in that, at the top of a ski run, a cool, snowy environment, and the music just hit
Yeah.
in a way that I still recall, obviously.
Yeah. It feels orchestral, even though I don't know if there's I wrote down the word orchestral and I'm like, did I write that because of how well it seems to mesh or because there's actually orchestra pieces on there? Either way, it feels that way. And then I really like how there's some of those. I feel like the vocals are kind of distorted on that one, and I feel like it fits really, really well. And maybe it's more me, but like some of the distortion at the end as it fades out. Like I just think there's something just yeah, it is such a set the mood for the album. His vocal delivery on, and I'm gonna probably mess up the lyric, but on everything is and everything is and everyone is really is. I love how like at other times it's distorted, but there it's really clear. Like there's so many things going on in that song. So yeah, it's about as perfect as an opening track as you can get for an album.
Other tracks that stood out, My Iron Lung, and I goofed on my Guitar Gadget trivia. This is the song that
Okay.
uses the Digitech whammy in the beginning. But the line that always gets me from this song is when the power runs out, we'll just hum. Like
Mm,
I don't know why, but that just kind of the sense of apocalypse and carrying on
yeah.
in the apocalypse just tickles me.
Yeah. I really love how at the end the guitars when they cut out and then it's just his vocals. Like it's a really again it's one of those things where like they the the song craft in that song is really really well done because it just the way that song is constructed and put together again it just feels like this they didn't just go in and throw this together. This feels like a real thought out thing and I really I that's my favorite part of that song.
Another one, Bulletproof,
Hmm.
um, isn't usually on people's top list. It's a little bit more off the beaten path, but I think this has a great it's a great foreshadow of some of the tones that will be present on OK Computer with the more undistorted guitars, atmospheric. I was talking about Ed kind of adds those atmospheric, ethereal um, bits
Hmm.
over the top that I
Hmm.
think this song is a good example of.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was re-listening today and I think that that was one that stuck out there in the second half for me. So, I love talking about closing tracks. I talk about it on every album I cover. What are your thoughts on that as a on Street Spirit parentheses fade out as a closing track?
I think it's a fantastic way to end the album. I love it's much simpler, just the acoustic, really nice finger picking,
Hmm, yeah.
and yeah, I think it caps it off brilliantly.
Yeah. I think it's a perfect closer for this album. I think it, yeah, I love the way it builds. There's a lot of tension, especially in the vocal performance. It just, I don't know. It's a great closing track. Again, I want closing tracks to feel epic. Even on punk rock records, I want them to feel epic, which doesn't always happen. But I think it's a really good closing track. It's one of my, again, a favorite of the album from me. The other one that I'll mention, just because we haven't mentioned it, is High and Dry. I think that's a real memorable song. We're going to jump all the way back to side A, but it's kind of a masterpiece of kind of that alternative indie sound. That's what it reminds me the most of. And so I don't know, there's something about High and Dry. And High and Dry is the one where you mentioned earlier he started to play with the falsetto. I feel like that's one where that falsetto really starts to come through. And so that's interesting that you brought that Jeff Buckley reference up before because I think it that his vocals really come through on that, and it just feels like I don't know, it feels like great alternative indie rock, and it feels like one of those first moments where they're not just a rock band, but there's something a little more artistic to them going on because it's track three, and it's kind of where they start to I don't know flex those muscles in some ways. Other songs that you want to call out?
I think that touched upon my favorite parts of the record, but again, as we said, I think everything's solid. There's no tracks that are skippable or weak
Yep, I
in the
agree.
collection.
Yeah, and it's strong all the way through. Like I think side A is incredibly strong. Like again, it's just the first four songs are all I think just unbelievable. But you know, Bones is also solid. Bring it, and then Nice Dreams or Nice Dream, kind of it kind of brings it down a little, but then it builds back up with the kind of the explosive ending. So like side A is almost perfect, and side B is I think there's nothing wrong with side B. It's just kind of in comparison to side A. It's side A is just so good. But again, I like I said before, like Just is just a great. You could have put Just at the beginning of the album, and it also is a great lead off track. So it's a great start to side B in my opinion. But it's kind of amazing. Like look, I was just looking through like the first six songs. And it's like, yeah, that's about as perfect a 6 song run as you can get for a side A in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment, and I think it's kind of as how I consider this in the greater scope of Radiohead canon.
Hmm.
Like it's a great album, but compared to their other works, it's not at the top of my list. But it's a very distinguished collection. So the fact that it's not my favorite doesn't mean it's not still a fantastic album.
I could burst a million bubbles, circle.
If somebody has not checked this album out, which is pretty funny, they stumble across my little dinky podcast and they're like, "What do you mean? I've never heard of this, the Bends." But if somebody hasn't, like, what's your explanation? What are you going to tell somebody for like, "Hey, this is 30 years later. Go back and check out this album."
Great songwriting, solid collection, good pacing, and approachable. It's a rock record.
Yep.
Most songs have verses and choruses. It's not as out there, so it's a great starting place with their discography.
Yep. I agree. I think they would go on to push more boundaries with OK Computer and Kid A, but like this is one of the greatest rock albums of the 90s. It's one of the greatest rock albums of the last 30 years, and I would argue it's one of the greatest rock albums of all time. Like this is guys coming together and really showing what they can do and learning how to do songcraft, which is kind of some of the things we mentioned. But like, I remember I had a former coworker who I'd be like, okay, Computer, I think is still at the time was my favorite. And we'll get to yours in a second here, but In Rainbows is actually my favorite Radiohead album at this point. But she was like, oh no, it's the Bends. The Bends is still the best. And for her, it was just because she just wants the guitars. And so that's for her, it was, is what it was. And I'll be honest, if somebody was like, no, this is my favorite Radiohead album, I'm not going to fight them on it because it's just so good. It's so listenable. I've listened to it a ton this week and it's just so listenable, even though it's artistic and it pushes some boundaries and it's unique. It still has got a very listenable quality. It's not a pop record by any means, but it's got so much replay value for just a great rock record.
And I think also it's worthy from the point of contextualizing the rest of their discography
Yeah.
or understanding the evolution of their sound as they move on to the more massive smash hit critically acclaimed albums.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you've mentioned it. This is maybe not your favorite Radiohead album. Well, let's start with your top three. What are your top three Radiohead albums?
Okay, Computer for
Okay.
me, it just hit at exactly the right time for me, and
Hmm. That's your introduction too. So you
yeah,
always remember your first.
yep. Then um,
I didn't put it in the notes, so this is spur of the moment.
I think I'm gonna say In Rainbows next, followed
Okay.
by Kid A, but
Okay.
I'm so bad at ranking things, but I think that's where they fall for me, at
Yeah.
least today.
I once thought I was bad at ranking things, and now I actually have gotten like I think I'm okay at it, and so like I've tried to do it more and more, just because I it's fun and it's something to do. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm just I would switch out this for Kid A, just because I get that Kid A is a better album, but I probably prefer this one. So like I'm looking at this from like a favorites perspective. For me, In Rainbows is number one. I actually think it is their best album, as well as for me there's a really 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 strong emotional connection to it because of a personal connection that I had to a friend who passed away, and so that Reckner was his favorite song off of his favorite album. And so I always loved that album. And then I met him and it like enhanced my flavor for that album so much. And then when he passed away unexpectedly, like it's now this, like I can't listen to that song without crying. And so that has become my favorite Radiohead album. It's the album I'm most connected with. But and I also just do think it is really, really good. And then I'd go OK Computer, and then I go this instead of Kid A. But Kid A is number 4 by easily. So our top 4 seem to be about the same. We just shuffle in the order a little.
And it's interesting to meet people who have come to Radiohead at different points in their
Sure.
discography. So I went to Lollapalooza and saw them on their Moonshaped Pool tour,
Oh, okay.
and a lot of the other fans that were there up against the rails with me came to them. Their starting point is in Rainbows,
Okay.
and it's just a different way of conceptualizing, like, okay, computer is just so iconic to me, and
Yeah.
it hit me at a time when I was developing an interest in music, and
It fed that, right? I mean, it fed that. It didn't just, it wasn't just something to listen to. It feels like it was something that was like an experience and like it enhanced the rest of your life as well. Not just like, oh yeah, this is fun to listen to, but it's pushing you in other areas as well.
yeah, it sounds corny, but it changed the way I conceive of music
Yeah.
and what's possible.
Yeah. I think a testament to how I think powerful their music can be. And I know I've met plenty of people who just are like, they're overrated. It's all dumb. And like, that's fine. You can go and have that opinion. I have no problem. But like the power of them to me is that like again, I've made the mention like I'm a punk rock kid. In my opinion, the perfect album is 10 songs at 35 minutes most. None of their records are that, and I still am totally enthralled with pretty much everything. What's the follow up to Kid A, which is basically a lot of the stuff they did just couldn't include in Kid A, and I always mess up the anesthesia or amnesia,
Amnesiac.
amnesiac. Okay, that's the one. I that is my least favorite. I will say. I even think Pablo Honey is a little better than it. Uh,
Ooh.
I know. That is fighting words, but that one just doesn't do a whole lot for me. But everything else, I feel like has like something that draws me in. Have you ever evaluated his alternative rock alternative list to Hail to the Thief?
No, what's
Oh,
that?
okay.
Or like alternative track order?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so
No.
if you want to hear us talk about this, I'm going to throw this after we sign off. So I'm going to cut this out, but we're gonna dive into that. So if you want to hang on, you can hear us talk about it later.
All these things I want this alone. Fade out
Okay, so that's our breakdown of The Bends by Radiohead, again released March 13th in the UK and then April 4th. I don't have it a second time on my notes. I think April 4th in the United States, but we'll release this album or we'll release this episode on March 13th, 1995. So it is celebrating a 30-year anniversary. And I don't care that those things make me feel kind of old. I'm glad to be old, I guess. Mike, I know before you had said you don't have much of a social media presence, so nothing for you to pitch, nothing for you to sell, I don't believe, but I'm glad we got to connect. So
Yeah, nothing on social media. I was thinking of just media in general. One show that I am desperately evangelizing to people.
sure.
It's caught on worldwide, but isn't huge in America. Taskmaster. It's a comedy program. They put five comedians in outrageous or silly situations, and then trying to accomplish some task, and then they come back for the in the studio and see how everyone has done and who came up with clever hacks and who did it the most straightforward and painful way. I I really struggle to pitch this, but it's one that I love. My wife and I came to it during COVID times, and it's just a great low effort, high comedy
Okay.
experience. So go watch a couple episodes of Taskmaster. It's available on YouTube.
Okay. YouTube. Okay. I was gonna say, where can people find it? Cool. Another one, if you are, especially if you like Radiohead or if this has piqued your interest in Radiohead, there's a YouTube channel called Middle Eight. He does a lot of different random music things, and I think his takes are mostly pretty good. but he did a whole series on Radiohead. He doesn't cover this album, ironically, so it's fun that I'm pitching it. But I don't know when I'll next swing back to another Radiohead album on the show. So he talks about OK Computer and why, and he goes into like a lot of the history. So if you don't want to go through and read the recording section of Wikipedia and you'd rather have somebody tell you, he's actually a great person to have tell you. So the middle 8, and he's got 3 videos on Radiohead. I think at least 3. Actually, he's got 4. He's got one on, and if I'm wrong on this, I apologize. I'm doing this off the top of my head, no notes. He does one on OK Computer and why it was such a groundbreaking album. He does one on a Kid A and why it was such a huge left turn and why it was so, why they did that album. Like he goes into some of the interviews and why they talk about it. And then he has one on In Rainbows and why it's such a freeing album for them. Because if you're not aware, In Rainbows is the one that they released for Name Your Price. And so it was kind of the reason they did that was because of their record company situation and how they were not on a record label anymore. And so they felt very free. And so why I think that is my favorite Radiohead album, even without the personal connection, is like it kind of combines a lot of their. I think it's just a kind of a perfect experimental, but yet still has radio friendliness to it. So that's why I think I really, really love that album. So he's got a video on that, and then I think he has one on Moonshape Pool. Is that how
Yeah.
Okay. And why that is, if that is the last Radiohead album, which I think is a possibility, why it's such a great closing to their discography. So there you go. There's the middle 8. He's got some good videos out there on Radiohead. He's got a lot of other really cool ones too, actually. A lot of pretty interesting music commentary, but those are his Radiohead ones.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the channel and I've listened to or watched the Radiohead work that he's done.
Nice. Well, I'm excited to hear that you were familiar. Nice. Okay. Cool. Well, Mike, thanks so much. I'm so glad we got to talk. Even if we didn't do this, it was kind of good to catch up because the end of last year was switching jobs. It was kind of a rough change, and it was it felt a little abrupt for those. So I'm glad we got to reconnect, and I hope things continue to go well at the job. But thanks so much for taking time to sit down and chat with me about this album.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Album Anniversary Podcast. I want to say thanks again for Mike to join me. It was great to hear kind of his connection with Radiohead and to kind of hear him talk about this album and Radiohead in general and just why this album is important to him, why it's an album he enjoys and loves. And it was just great to have him on the show. So thanks, Mike. Thanks for taking time out of your Sunday night to sit and talk with me. Let us know what you thought. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? What are your favorites from this album? You can find me on Twitter at CalebTheSpy. You can also find me on Instagram at CalebTheSpy. There's underscores in between the words on Instagram. Look for the chickadee. That is still the main way. You can find me on both of the main social media websites. I also have started a Patreon. If you go to Patreon, you can just, again, search for the Album Anniversary Podcast. I am right now. It's just totally free. It's a free tier. There's no cost to it. Again, just trying to find a place where maybe can have a little more community. So just trying to collect people and just kind of people who are interested in the show. There's ways to communicate with people better there. I might at some point think about doing a paid tier, but again, I can't imagine I will. We'll see. But, might do some specific exclusives that are just on Patreon that I don't put out on the normal feed. I've already got a couple ideas for stuff, just other interests. So please go find me on Patreon. Sign up for free. Just kind of join the little community I'm trying to build there. Again, social media also is a little, like Mike. Mike's not on social media. That is a way he could follow the show or stay connected is by joining on Patreon, again, for free. There's no cost. And you can stay connected with the show through that way. And maybe some of the comments and people can chat on the episode or can comment on the episodes, stuff like that. So that's a long enough pitch for that. So you can find me on Patreon. You can also email the show, CalebTheSpyPodcasts@gmail.com. No spaces or underscores in that. And there is an S at the end. If you want to be on the show, that's the easiest way to do it. Or, just hit me up on Patreon. Maybe that's a good way to do it too. But I do have a spreadsheet that's out there that tracks all the shows I'm hoping to do for 2025. I do have guests for most of them. A huge majority of them I already do, but I'm looking for some of these to add multiple people. So some episodes coming up, I'm going to have a couple people on the show, especially if it's an album that I may not have as much to say on. Perfect opportunity to bring 2 people together who might have more to say. They can talk and I can just kind of host. So if you're interested, ask and I can send you that spreadsheet. You can add your name to one of the shows that's coming up and you can kind of see some of the shows that I have planned. So again, CalebTheSpypodcasts at gmail.com. This is the longest outro I think I've ever done. Clearly, I need to rewrite this in the script. Please subscribe and share the podcast. Leave a rating or review. I have heard is an effective way to spread the word about podcasts. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do with my friend Scott. It's called I Survived Youth Group in the 90s, and it's not just a podcast where we reminisce about our youth and our youth group experience. We're trying to go back and interview fellow 90s and 2000s youth group kids and just see where they're at now, see where they're at today, and whether you've left the faith entirely or you are still at the church you were raised at. We just want to hear your story and how that youth group experience has impacted your life. The music at the beginning and the end of the show is the instrumental version of the song Sing It Out at Street Level by Peg and the Rejected. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon. So now we'll talk about it, and then we'll swing back. So he after the release of that album, it was a couple years later. You can Google it, and I always say his first name wrong, Thome. I always want to say I don't know why I can't say his first name, but
there's a Mystery Science Theater where they're riffing and they keep referring to him as Thom Yorke.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah.
But he has said that album is probably, like, in hindsight, they're like, it's probably more bloated than it should be. He's like, I think we cut it down. And then he's like, I would totally reorder it. And I will say, I do really appreciate his reordered list. I think let's see if I can find it here. It's fairly Googleable. Oh. Yeah. Okay. So I'll read it off to you because I have it. I made it my own little playlist. So, and these are just names, right? So I think he cuts a couple tracks because let's see here. He's only got 10 tracks on it. All right, you're gonna hear if you're still listening here at the end of our show, you're gonna hear me clicking around because I'm doing research while we're talking here. Okay. So let me pull up. I'm going to have both track lists side by side. Oh, maybe I am. Come on, scroll to the bottom of the page. Jeepers. Okay, so the original album has 14 songs, and it's 56 minutes. His version has 10 songs, and it's 39 minutes. So it cuts out almost 20 minutes. I mean, it's cutting out like 17 minutes worth of stuff. So here's his new track list. It's There is where he starts the album, which originally is track 9. So totally different. It's a 5-minute song. And then he has The Gloaming is his second song, which originally that's track 8. So he moves those two way up in the order. Sail to the Moon is the same spot. It's number 3 on the original. It's number 3 on his new track order list. Sit Down and Stand Up is number 4. That's originally track 2. And then it's Go to Sleep, which was originally track 5, so that one stays at track 5. And then Where I End You Begin is track 6. That's track 6 on the original. And then Scatterbrain, which is originally the 13th song, moves all the way up to, what is that, 8? Yeah, 8. And then that's 7. Sorry, that's track 7. Track 8, then he goes with 2 + 2 = 5, which is originally the kickoff to the album. So he moves that all the way down to track 8. And then 9 is, I'm never going to say this right, Myxopomoyas, I am the dumbest man alive.
Myxomatosis.
Thanks. I'm glad you're here to help me with that. That's what he goes with that track 9. And then he still ends the album with A Wolf at the Door. So he cuts out tracks like Punch Up at a Wedding, I Will, We Suck Your Blood, I think are the 4 that get kicked out. So that's his alternative track list. I can send it to you.
That's interesting. I'm looking at it. It does seem to be like increasing in intensity much more through the record.
Yeah.
Like the really rocking songs like 2 + 2 = 5 and Myxomatosis kind of come at hit you at the end
Yeah. So
versus off the bat.
I stream this album more than I listen to the CD because I actually really do. Again, 56 minutes is getting really long, in my opinion. I still think Hail to the Thief is good. And I think, especially for a lot of what it's saying, again, you got to remember it's as close as they get to a protest album. I mean,
Oh,
it's,
yeah, there's angry political
yes,
stuff all across this one.
yes.
Well, I mean the title.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's absolutely the closest thing they have to a protest album. But I do prefer the 10 track reorder. And yeah, I do think it builds. It's a really interesting listen. So there you go. There's something for you to do tomorrow at work. You can load that track list up, and again, I made a playlist out of it. And I think there's one on Spotify if you use Spotify. I think if you just type in his name, like track list, it'll eventually you can find it.
Yeah, that's where I'm looking at it right
Okay,
now.
nice. And I have it right where you were following along. I still have it right.
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. So there you go. So that's I thought that'd be interesting to talk about. So there you go.
Absolutely. Always nice to have a new way to look at something that you've enjoyed for years and years at this
Yeah.
point.
So I think the other thing that I noted about this a lot is that at times, and you mentioned it with the idea of like throwing as many guitar chords in there, there's a lot of moments on this that feel very raw still. Like there's just moments where it feels like it's still very a guitar driven, but then it also feels very refined. Like there's moments where it feels so those are another two things that I kept on thinking about this album in a matter of like two opposites that that seem to mesh well together. And that's another one that there's times where this album feels very, very raw, but then it also feels very, very refined. One other like back and forth or kind of yin and yang, I want to say from this album is that there are times where it feels very simplistic. Like the beginning of fake plastic trees is, there's moments on here where it is just, again, as a guy who can't play guitar, there's simple chord progressions, simple guitar that comes through, and then it turns into something more complex and unique. So I think they also do that as well. Like there are very simple moments. There are just very like basic rock and roll moments, but then there's also these kind of cool, complex and unique moments. So it's got a lot of that going on too, where it starts simple, gets complex, and they just seem to work really well and really well balanced.